Welcome to SalonEra, a salon experience for the 21st century that brings together artists and audiences for music and conversation. Produced remotely, SalonEra is not subject to geographic or conventional programming limitations. That means that every episode is full of different artists, different music, and spontaneous conversation. We're creating new opportunities for artists to collaborate, and we're bringing our work and our passions directly into your home. We'd love to see and feel your encouragement or applause, so feel free to engage in the chat at any time. We also look forward to responding to your thoughts and questions when we go live for the post-show Q&A. While SalonEra is free to watch, I urge you to consider making a donation. Your support compensates our participating artists whose livelihoods have been so dramatically affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. Thanks for watching and enjoy the show.
Orpheus with his mountain trees and the mountain tops that freeze. Other vessels with hated sea, when he did see, when he did see. Orpheus with his mountain trees and the mountain tops that freeze. Other vessels with hated sea, when he did see, when he did see. To his music, flowers and flowers ever rose, a song shows that beat a lasting spring, a song shows that beat a lasting spring. Everything that had him play in the field of the sea. Heads and then they fly, heads and then they fly. In sweet music is such art, killing and grief apart. Fall asleep by hearing it die. In sweet music is such art, killing and grief apart. Killing and grief apart. Fall asleep by hearing it die. Hearing it die. In sweet music is such art, killing and grief apart. Fall asleep by hearing it die. In sweet music is such art, killing and grief apart. Killing and grief apart. Fall asleep by hearing it die. By hearing it die.
No myth is more foundational to musicians than that of Orpheus. Son of Calliope, the muse of eloquence and epic poetry, Orpheus received the gift of a lyre and was taught how to play it by Apollo, the Olympian god of the sun, music, and poetry. The power of Orpheus's music was so great that it was said that he could charm the birds, the fish, and wild beasts. As we heard in the song by Maurice Green a few moments ago, Orpheus even inspired trees and mountaintops to movement, and he could divert the course of rivers and the sea. Perhaps most famously, Orpheus's song had the power to convince Pluto, or Hades, ruler of the underworld, to allow Orpheus to bring his wife Eurydice back from the dead. Shakespeare's homage to Orpheus is found in his play, The Famous History of the Life of King Henry VIII. In this moment, it's music's role to assuage the incredibly upset and disappointed Queen Catherine of Aragon, who had just learned that Henry will divorce her. She retreats to her chambers and appeals to her maidservant, Patience, to take up the lute, as sweet music is the only thing that could reduce her pain. The power of music, to heal, to convince, to move, is at the heart of tonight's program as we explore different settings of the Orpheus myth, from 17th century Mantua to 1950s Rio de Janeiro. Along the way, we'll consider how the story gets filtered through a number of different cultural contexts. I'm joined tonight by scholar Susan McClary, soprano Michelle Kennedy, and tenor Jason McStutes, who will bring Orpheus' story to life through conversation and music that spans the centuries. We'll enjoy excerpts from Monteverdi's Orfeo and Charpentier's La Descente d'Orphée aux Enfers, and consider different artistic interpretations of the story, including Marcel Camus' 1959 film Orfeo Negro, or Black Orpheus. Susan McClary joins us from Cleveland, Ohio. Jason McStutes is in Watertown, Massachusetts, and Michelle Kennedy is at home in Oakland, California. Welcome. Greetings. It is so fun to have you here to talk about the Orpheus myth this afternoon.
Hi.
Great to be here.
Great. I did some talking in this introduction about, this incredible influence that Orpheus has to animate animals, to move the rivers and the mountains. But the fact is, we're here to talk about Orpheus in the underworld, and I thought we might start by actually reviewing the basics of that story, before we start to understand all the different lenses that we're going to view it through. And I wondered if you could introduce that for us, Susan.
Sure. We first have references to Orpheus in the 6th century BC in Greek sources. And he is first just identified as a musician, as a very powerful musician, as a prophet, as an oracle. About 100 years later, the story of his descent into the underworld begins to enter into sources. And about 100 years after that, the layer is added that he has gone there in search of his wife. It's only 100 BC that the name Eurydice or Eurydice comes up. Before that, it's just a wife. And so there are many, many layers of this. The version that we all follow is the one that was written by Ovid in his Metamorphoses, which was from 9 AD. And he gives us the story. It begins with the wedding. Eurydice is bitten by a snake and dies on her wedding day. Orpheus laments, goes to the underworld, where he convinces Pluto that he should be allowed to bring his bride back. Pluto finally, after all of the lamentation and convincing that Orpheus does, and by the way, Ovid spends almost his entire story on that lament. He wants us to see this as a model of rhetoric. He says, yes, you may take her back, but you cannot turn back and look until you're both up in the upper world. Right at the last minute, Orpheus turns around and Eurydice is pulled back into hell. He then laments for the rest of his life. In Ovid, he turns to boys because he is so struck at having had this woman taken away from him. And in revenge for that, the Maenaids come and rip him apart. Not the version that we usually see, but I think Jason is going to talk about that.
There are a variety of different endings, and the Monteverdi specifically ends with a kind of way to leave the drama of the loss and yet maintain some sense of triumph to the end. Apollo sort of descends at Orpheus's darkest moment where he is contemplating ending his own life and says, no, don't do that. Come up and live with us on Olympus. And I think that's it's interesting that while the Monteverdi is probably the prototype for so many of these stories, none of them bother to take up Monteverdi's idea of the ending.
The Monteverdi itself actually has two different endings. We're going to hear one in a moment where Apollo descends and says, Orpheus, come with me, I'll redeem you, and, all this terrible stuff that happened, don't worry about it, it's great up in heaven with the rest of the gods. But am I right in understanding there's another ending as well?
I was aware of that other ending, but I've never performed it. I'm not sure it's in any of the received scores.
Was it just in the libretto?
I think that's probably true, and so I don't really know a lot about the alternate ending.
Mm-hmm. Apollo's Fire actually did do a reconstruction of that and performed it a couple of years ago. He is ripped to shreds with his head floating down the river, still singing. It was remarkable.
That may be the only musical or dramatic adaptation of the Orpheus myth that actually deals with his being, ripped apart by the Maenads. I think that most of the rest find some other relatively regal and noble way to dispense with the end of Orpheus's story.
Vientene me qual ciel, ca sei
tanto padre sarei non degno figlio se non seguissi il tuo fedel consiglio. Saliamo, saliamo, cantiamo al cielo, gloria virtù verace, degno premio di sé, di due pace, gloria virtù verace, degno premio di sé, di pace.
It is so great to be able to see and hear this live performance footage from the Boston Early Music Festival. They were so kind to share that with us. And so great to see you then in costume and adopting all of these different roles, Jason.
Thank you, and it is. I'll also say a thank you to Kathleen Fay and the Boston Early Music Festival. They made this footage available, the whole show available as a part of their virtual season this past year,
Right.
and it was really so lovely to get to revisit what was a beautiful performing memory for me and for many of my colleagues. So and lovely just now to relive it again. It's an amazing and beautiful moment.
Absolutely. Well, a changed ending like the one that we just saw is one thing, but, a composer like Marc-Antoine Charpentier, writing his version of La Descente Orphée aux Enfers in the 1670s, I think, is going to, filter his setting through the conventions of his time and place. And that may mean adding all sorts of extra characters. So in Charpentier's setting that we'll hear, Orpheus descends to the underworld and he encounters three villains, one of whom you play. And then what happens next, Jason?
The three villains are three of the most infamous criminals in antiquity's history. We all imagine hell as the place of eternal burning and only bad people go there. And of course, the antiquity's idea of hell had many different layers. And in fact, everybody went to hell. Nobody went someplace else, but there were nice parts of hell and bad parts of hell. And these particular three criminals, they are in the bad part of hell. They're in Tartarus, being forever tortured. And each is forever tortured in a kind of poetic and yet ghastly way. So I portray Ixion, who was a king in antiquity, and he is tortured by being strapped to a flaming wheel that is forever spinning and forever burning. Next is Tantalus, who, as we get the English word tantalize, right? He is forever hungry and forever thirsty, and he's unable to assuage his hunger and thirst. And then also the final villain, whose liver is eternally being pecked out, much like Prometheus, pecked out and regrown every day. And so in this production, you'll see the beginning part of the scene. There are three Furies, quite lovely colleagues of ours who are dressed in lovely Baroque costumes, but who are sort of physically torturing us with gesture, and we react to that gesture as part of our torment. And then suddenly this eternity of suffering is interrupted by beauty. And suddenly in this place, this unexpected place, there is something so gorgeous that it causes all the pain to stop. And these three criminals react to that in the most sort of miraculous way. I love that Charpentier takes the time to set not only the criminals' situation, but also their reaction to it, how each of them suddenly has this moment of feeling normal and whole again. And they beg Orpheus, of course, to stay, but Orpheus's job is not to come there and make their lives nice. It's to go to the underworld and bring back his beloved, in French here, Eurydice. So we all react, and again, Orpheus is our beloved colleague, Aaron Sheehan. We all react to his lovely tones and enjoy his presence there in hell.
Absolutely. Well, let's jump in and listen to that. And again, this is beautiful footage shared with us from a 2015 performance from the Boston Early Music Festival.
Quelle touchante voix, quelle douce harmonie, suçant mon rigoureux tourment. Ni ses fruits, ni ses eaux ne me font plus envie. Je respire ma roue, arrête-moi ce moment.
ciel autour la fin sembla soupir. Mortel, qui que tu sois, si ton cœur est sensible à notre nom mal dire, recommence à m'aimer au doux son de ta lyre. Les tendres accents de ta voix recommence à m'aimer au doux son de ta lyre. Les tendres accents de ta voix. Je ne refuse point ce secours à voilage. Heureux, si ces tristes accents servent-moi si puissants pour attendrir plutôt avec les mêmes charmes. Heureux, si ces tendres accents le portaient à finir les peines que je sens. Il n'est rien dans son fait, il n'est rien dans son fait qui se puisse défendre de le charme vaincre.
Thanks so much for watching SalonEra. We are thrilled to bring together artists from across North America and beyond to share their performances and inspiration with you, our audience at home. Your donation supports the production of this programming, including compensating all our working artists who have been deeply affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. We'll return to the show in a moment, but in the meantime, please consider supporting these artists and SalonEra with a donation. Les Délices has had a truly transformative year. We couldn't create a brand new web series like SalonEra or produce a world-class virtual concert series without your encouragement and support. I want to invite you to help seed Les Délices' future at our 2021 virtual benefit, Passion and Promise. Join us on Saturday, May 15th as we stream live from Cleveland's Bobstop. Our benefit includes exciting new performances of music from the 14th through the 18th centuries, appearances by SalonEra and Les Délices artists, a fabulous silent auction, and interactive fun as we celebrate the accomplishments of an unparalleled year. We want to make it easy to attend. Purchase tickets before April 25th and automatically receive a $25 early bird discount on general or VIP admission. Visit lesdelices.org/benefit to learn more and get your tickets today. Hi, welcome back. It's been a bevy of beautiful French Baroque music with that Charpentier and the little excerpt from Les Délices, and I wanted to turn our attention, welcome Michelle.
Thank you, good to be here.
To Rameau, who apparently had a project to write an opera on Orpheus, or Orpheus, and didn't complete it, but we do have a cantata. It's really interesting when these big dramatic stories get sort of, translated for the domestic sphere, living room music, as it were, and how the drama ends up playing out.
It's true that preceding that segment we just saw is kind of a nice lead-in, I feel, to the Rameau, because the hope that Orpheus's music will charm the gods of the underworld into granting him his wish is kind of a fitting wish for this opening aria, because it's full of confidence. It's in the splendor of that charm, the spell, the command with which Orpheus plays, and that heaven and earth bow to his every command because of the transporting power of his music. And it's very much in that moment of great confidence that this aria is born before many, many other things happen and the tone of the story shifts so dramatically.
Tragedy afflicts Orpheus twice, at least in the course of this story, right? The first time when, the serpent bites his new wife, and she is, it goes into anaphylactic shock or whatever it happens. And the second time when he believes that he's saved her, he's almost at, the threshold to the upper world, and he has this moment of doubt and looks back. And she is then, stolen from him a second time. But first of all, he thinks, once he's, gotten permission from Pluto to carry her off, that he's had his cake and eat it too, that he's won it all. And so we do hear in this opening aria from Rameau's cantata, Orpheus, this confidence. We almost hear... the music is rather triumphant. It's actually full of sort of trumpet calls. This is originally for violin that I play on the oboe, but it might as well be trumpet music on a certain level.
Absolutely, it feels like a clarion call, and I love the dovetailing between the instrumentation and the voice here. It feels graceful, it feels sure, and I sort of imagined it over the progression of the whole da capo as Orpheus's progression with confidence down to the underworld, that he could persuade, that he could serenade, and that he could make his way all the way through. And it was interesting hearing your vantage point earlier, Susan, about this moment right before he looks back. What is he thinking at that crucial turning point? Is it a crisis of faith? Is he doubting whether the gods will make good on their promise? Is he doubting whether his bride is really behind him? It's kind of a fascinating turn of the plot.
Right. No, all of those things. If he didn't look back, if he only believed that she was there forever, she could be there forever. And I think this is one of the things that we try to convince ourselves of when a beloved one dies. We have that spirit, and we genuinely want the physical body to be there. And to demand sight always makes the illusion disappear. The underlying story here is very much about that, about having faith that the beloved spirit is with you. And what happens if you look back and discover that she is not, he is not.
Yeah, it's so much complexity. And let's hear this moment of hubris and overconfidence before the great tragedy happens from Rameau's Orpheus cantata. Bravo, Michelle.
Bravo.
Oh, thank you. Likewise. I love that instrumentation. It's so infectious and it captures this moment of triumph so vividly.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Exactly.
You know, which obviously is in great contrast to what we're going to hear next, which is the fact that there's a tragedy at the center of this story. And of course, you know, the musical portrayal of that is often the sort of centerpiece of the drama. We started our program with Monteverdi Orfeo, and the Possente Spirito is the kind of climax of lament in that theatrical and dramatic section. And the whole idea of musical laments has different sorts of tropes and that go through music history. And I wondered, Susan, if you might talk to us about lament as a kind of a thing and a construct in music.
Sure. This becomes a standard procedure in around the 1630s. Mm-hmm. And the standard lament pattern is just 4 descending notes, bum, 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 which is repeated over and over and over again. This actually comes from North Africa and from the south of Spain. We still hear this as the foundation of flamenco. What Monteverdi does when he writes the first of these standardized laments, in the Lament of the Nymph, is that he continues to repeat it over and over, but he loops it back so that it ends on the tonic. Whereas flamenco and North African maqams always end on that low note, which is the lowest note on the guitar. So there's a very interesting cultural mix that happens in this. But after Monteverdi produces this, everyone uses that formula to refer to lament. We have very famous ones like the When I Am Laid in Earth, Dido's lament, the Crucifixus in Bach's D minor Mass. They are simply ubiquitous. And that process allows for a different kind of temporality than had been available in the 16th century or in other kinds of 17th century music, where you simply repeat and repeat and repeat on an ostinato, which is the word for obstinate. It never goes away. You can never escape. So it becomes this tremendous metaphor for being sunk in the pit of despair.
Right. Right. We're going to hear a piece actually that Jason chose to share with us, a bit of Monteverdi, but it's actually a canzonetta, and it has a real lamenting and very moving quality. And Jason, could you introduce this for us?
Sure. This is Si dolce il tormento, and really it's about a tortured lover in general, someone whose affection is not adequately returned, but who loves regardless because of the way that it makes that person feel within themselves. The last verse, however, has a little bit of a sting to say, I hope that one day you get to feel the way that I feel right now. And then maybe I won't love you back then. So it's his way of sort of turning the tables in this instance. And it's obviously a well-known and loved canzonetta, and I've had a chance to perform it frequently and love it quite a lot. So
wonderful. Well, I'm so glad you shared it with us. Let's listen to Si dolce il tormento.
Se
Absolutely gorgeous, Jason.
Yeah.
It captures the lovesickness so beautifully, Jason. Just this pining.
Right. It's sort of like the prequel to Orfeo, because the first thing they say is Orfeo has been whining and carrying on forever, and now he finally gets his bride. So you could sing that before Orfeo starts.
Well, we've been bouncing around already, between 17th century Italy and France and 18th century French living rooms with the Rameau. And I wanted to catapult us all the way into the 20th century for a moment, for one of the more famous film adaptations of the Orpheus story, which is from the late 1950s, 1959, Marcel Camus' Orfeo Negro. And Michelle, you had actually brought this idea for this episode to me, and you said, we could, contrast Rameau with Black Orpheus, and of course, which has an amazing, absolutely iconic bossa nova soundtrack. And I remember when we were preparing for the episode that I took the time and watched the film, which is fascinating, and it's so amazing to follow all the different correspondences of characters and the way that the film both takes up the ideas of Ovid and all its predecessors and also transforms them. But I wondered what stood out to you about Camus' film version of Black Orpheus, and then also maybe we can talk a little bit about the song that you'll share
Particular
with us.
piece.
Yeah,
I loved the historic context and also the aesthetic context for this film. I thought that the setting in Brazilian Carnival was so visually striking and has so many different elements from wardrobe choices to dancing to this sort of like frenzied, fleeting festival. And I found it fascinating, in particular in the film, how it kind of turns from that moment of bravado and brilliance fairly readily into a more sinister take on it all. And I feel like this is sort of an interesting turn in the myth generally across historic contexts, is that turn from splendor to melancholy. I was struck by the setting in this sort of Brazilian countryside, and I feel like that colors the idyllic phase of the love story between these two striking actors, and I was sort of fascinated stylistically with the bossa nova aesthetic for mourning in particular. Mm-hmm. It was an interesting and fascinating new sort of challenge for me to live with that style and play with it. To me, it speaks to the sort of frame story element of the Orpheus myth, which is that it's about the transformative power of music and how music can console and heal. But I think also it's about how we can be stuck in this eternal loop of suffering, which is played out in these melodies that stay with us and kind of ricochet through our entire being. And I feel like this melody embodies all of that. It's beautiful, it's deeply, deeply melancholic, and it's also full of passion and longing.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. Thinking a little bit, I agree with everything you say. Thinking a little bit about the Orpheus figure within the film, and also how we've seen the kind of transformation of Orpheus in these different cultural moments. Orpheus happens to be identified with a guitar here. One of the things that's interesting to me, we saw in the intro to the episode just actually one of the very final scenes of Orpheus holding Eurydice, who has died. And who's been taken in the middle of the night, essentially, kind of during the wildest frenzy of the carnival by death. And at the very end of the film, he's left holding Eurydice up on this hilltop. And there are these 3 children there, and one of them takes Orpheus's guitar, and all of a sudden this Magna de Carnaval comes back in the background, and the fact that the sun is rising and that this younger generation sort of takes up the song. I always also feel like it's this kind of moment of resurrection, which is really interesting. There's so much to talk about with this film.
There's so much. Yes.
I'd like to say the one thing about this film is it reminds us of how central dance is to almost all of these shows. Monteverdi's Orfeo is just filled with dances. And then the dances clear for a couple of minutes and someone has a solo, and then we go right back into dance. And that part of the film, I think, really resonates with everything we've been talking about. And the fact that we get to hear all of these preparations for Carnival, and then we get to be in Carnival, all of those resonate so much with early opera.
Right. Wow. Well, it's going to be interesting to hear in a moment our remote collaboration performance on period instruments of this, 1959 bossa nova ballad. We've given both Portuguese and the English translation lyrics, which is A Day in the Life of a Fool.
O sol nasceu, surgiu.
Bravo.
Wow.
I have to say that melody just took a hold of me from the minute I first heard it, and I just feel like this loop of sensuousness and longing mixed with just pining and heartbreak. I feel like Bonfa captures it so beautifully.
It is a really, really great song. There's a reason it turned into like an instant jazz standard.
Yeah, right.
It's true. It's such a beautiful arrangement, Deborah.
It works great on period instruments.
Absolutely.
Well, the transformational power of music has now, even within the course of this hour, spanned the centuries, which is exciting. And we have one more selection to share, which is also, from the cusp of the 20th century. Jason, you shared with us a setting actually of the same Shakespeare text as we heard at the very opening of our program by Ralph Vaughan Williams, Orpheus with his lute.
And I love here the idea, Orpheus isn't always just thought of as simply a musician, but more importantly, a musician who puts words into action. So he's also in that way a poet. And so I think this idea that poetry and music exist as one thing, and we have a great poet like Shakespeare reinterpreting the same idea into his contemporary time, and then Vaughan Williams then reinterpreting Shakespeare as we saw earlier with the Maurice Greene, reinterpreting them into their own time. I think it's an important poem, and because of who it's about and because of what it represents to us all. The setting is very simple. I think Vaughan Williams is experimenting with using more a sense of interesting scales than simply major and minor scales, and the rhetoric of the song itself is quite simple, I think, delivered in a beautiful lilting line that reaches up as Orpheus reaches up and sort of falls down and comes to rest as Orpheus's story eventually does.
Well, I really look forward to enjoying this and to talking to you all more in the Q&A, where I think we can go crazy and off the rails and allow our imaginations to fly, and of course respond to audience questions. It's such a pleasure to do this with you and to talk about the Orpheus myth.
Likewise.
So,
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank
Total
you.
delight.
Let's hear some beautiful Vaughan Williams.
Orpheus with his lute made trees, and the mountain tops that freeze bow themselves when he did sing. To his music plants and flowers ever sprung, the sun and showers there had made a lasting spring. Everything that earth
We will be right back with Susan, Michelle, and Jason for our live Q&A in just a few moments. If you are watching on SalonEra.org, please just refresh your browser and the Q&A will be there. If you are on YouTube, be sure to subscribe to our page and you will be the first to know when we are going live. Same with Facebook. In the meantime, we want to share with you the trailer for one final episode for SalonEra for the season. We have episode 16, La Folia, coming up on May 3rd. And please save the date and get your tickets before the early bird special expires on April 25th for our Passion and Promise benefit on May 15. See you at the Q&A. Tune in on Monday, May 3rd at 7:30 Eastern as SalonEra caps off its spring season with La Folia, a party episode featuring soprano Sherazet Pantaki, countertenor Reginald Mobley, and lutenist Arash Murray. A celebratory vibe extends to the remote collaborations, which bring together 14 beloved artists for exuberant ground-based variations by Monteverdi, Piccinini, Boismortier, Purcell, Marais.